You know, when you hand a little kid a present, they spend about 90% of their energy on the wrapping paper.
Oh, absolutely. Tearing at the shiny foil, getting tangled in the ribbons.
Right, playing with the massive box, and you are sitting there on the couch watching them, thinking to yourself, you know, the thing you actually want, the thing that cost me a fortune, is inside that box.
They just completely ignore the gift for the packaging.
Yes. And we do this as adults too, especially with historical events. We get so wrapped up in the cultural traditions, the seasonal decorations, like the aesthetic of a moment, that we completely miss the staggering reality sitting right in the center of the room.
We mistake the packaging for the substance.
Precisely. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. In this custom deep dive into your provided sources, our mission is to take a specific text, tear away the packaging, and extract the raw, unvarnished insights for you. Today, we are looking at a text from December 23rd, 1855.
A very specific date.
It is. It is a sermon by Charles Spurgeon on Micah chapter 5, verse 2, titled The Incarnation and Birth of Christ.
So, looking at the date, December 23rd, your immediate assumption is that this is a standard, warm, nostalgic holiday message.
Right, the kind of message designed to make people feel cozy before they go home to roast a goose or something.
But Spurgeon immediately shatters that expectation. His framing is completely countercultural for the season. And keep in mind, Spurgeon was only 21 years old when he delivered this address at the New Park Street Chapel in London.
Which is wild to think about, 21.
I know. Yet he speaks with the theological weight of someone 3 times his age. He comes out swinging against the very concept of the holiday itself.
He really does. He says it is one of the greatest absurdities under heaven to think there is any religion in keeping the day.
Which is a bold statement.
Very bold.
Yeah.
He points out there are no probabilities whatever that Jesus was actually born in late December. He attributes the observance of it to purely Roman Catholic origins, or as he calls it, popish origins.
Yeah, his language is pretty sharp there.
He states very clearly that he does not see how consistent Protestants can account the day as sacred. But I want to push back on that a little bit, though. For a modern listener, hearing a Christian pastor say, you should not view Christmas Day as sacred, sounds incredibly abrasive. Why would he take such a stark historical position?
Well, to understand that, you have to look at the historical framework he is operating within. He notes that the old Puritans, the theological ancestors of the Reformed tradition, used to make a public spectacle of working on December 25th.
Wait, like intentionally working?
Oh, yeah. They would intentionally go out and do hard manual labor, making sure everyone saw them doing it, just to protest the religious observance of the holiday.
That is some serious dedication to a theological point.
It really is. They believed that if God had wanted the church to observe a specific holy day for the birth of Christ, the New Testament would have given a date and a command to do so.
Which, obviously, it does not.
Right. So since it does not, they viewed adding a religious holiday as a human invention that distracted from the actual commands of Scripture. But what is fascinating is that Spurgeon takes a highly pragmatic approach here.
How so?
He says the Puritans entered that protest so completely back then that we, as their descendants in 1855, do not need to keep up the aggressive protest. We do not need to go out and chop wood in the town square.
Okay, let's unpack this. He is saying we can just chill out a bit.
Basically. He says we can just take the good accidentally conferred by the day and leave the superstitions to the superstitious.
Right. I remember he actually says he wishes there were 10 or a dozen of these days in the year simply because there's work enough in the world and laboring people could use a little more rest.
Yeah, it is a massive benefit to gather around the family hearth and have a day off from the factories and the fields.
So tying it back to our opening analogy, Spurgeon is essentially separating the wrapping paper from the actual gift. He's saying, fine, enjoy the day off, eat the food, see your family.
But do not call it a holy day.
Exactly. We are discarding the cultural holiday traditions to look at the raw, staggering mechanics of the incarnation itself. We are throwing away the shiny foil and looking at the mechanics of how the infinite God stepped into finite human history.
And to get to those mechanics, he uses a very specific blueprint. He structures the text around 4 distinct questions derived directly from the short verse in the book of Micah.
Okay, let us go through those.
First, who sent him? Second, where did he come to? Third, what did he come for? And fourth, had he come before?
It is a highly logical progression. It moves from the celestial authorization to the earthly coordinates, to the purpose of the mission, and finally to the eternal preexistence of the Son.
It is a brilliant way to break it down.
So let us move straight into that first question, looking at the celestial authorization behind the incarnation. Who sent Jesus Christ?
Well, if you ask the average person on the street, even the average churchgoer, they might just say, well, Jesus decided to come down to earth.
But Spurgeon draws the answer right from the text of Micah. The verse says, "Out of thee shall he come forth unto me." The phrase "unto me" is the crucial element here.
Yeah, that is the anchor.
God the Father is the one speaking. God the Father is the one sending.
And Spurgeon identifies a massive theological pitfall at this exact point. He says humans are far too apt to forget that while there are distinctions in the persons of the Trinity, there are no distinctions in honor.
Meaning we tend to play favorites.
Precisely. He points out how frequently people ascribe the honor of salvation or the depths of its mercy more to Jesus Christ than they do to God the Father.
This is a very common human tendency. It actually has roots in early church heresies like Marcionism. People often frame the Father as the stern, distant, angry judge who is just up there demanding justice and blood.
While Jesus is the nice one.
Exactly. In this flawed view, the Son is the compassionate, benevolent figure who steps in almost against the Father's will to shield us from the Father's wrath.
Spurgeon insists this is a terrible, unbiblical mistake. He asks rhetorically, did not his Father send him? Did not the Holy Ghost beget him? He argues that anyone who properly understands the Trinity never sets one person of the Godhead before the other in terms of love or mercy.
He says they are all equally engaged at Bethlehem, at Gethsemane, and on Calvary. I love how he dismantles that good cop, bad cop view of the Trinity.
It is such a necessary correction.
If you are listening to this and you have always viewed God the Father as the angry cop and Jesus as the good cop, Spurgeon is directly dismantling your worldview right here. The Father is not a reluctant participant who was talked into saving humanity by a kinder, gentler Son.
No, the Father is the architect of the entire rescue mission.
And then Spurgeon moves into this incredibly vivid, emotional imagery of heaven to drive the point home. He asks the listener to conceive of a grief in heaven.
The way he sets up that imagery is striking. He notes that there had been a sad day in heaven once before.
When Satan rebelled and fell.
Right, dragging a third of the stars of heaven with him. You can imagine the angelic host reeling from that fracture. But Spurgeon argues that the day the Son of the Most High left his Father's bosom to descend to earth must have been an even sadder day.
He paints a picture of the Father and the Son who have existed in perfect, unbroken, infinite joy and fellowship for all eternity, facing the moment of separation required for this mission.
The imagery he uses for the Son's departure is so tactile. He describes a heavenly disrobing.
Yeah, the angels crowding around to see the Son of God take off his robes. The Son lays aside his crown, saying, "My Father, I am Lord over all, blessed forever, but I will lay my crown aside and be as mortal men are."
He strips himself of his bright vest of glory to wear a robe of clay. He takes off his starry mantles and robes of light to dress in the simple garments of a Galilean peasant.
Think about a modern analogy for a second. Imagine a billionaire CEO taking off his tailored suit, putting on a cheap uniform, and going undercover on his own factory floor.
Like that television show.
Right, but he is not doing it for a reality television show or a public relations stunt. He is doing it because the machinery is completely broken, the workers are dying, the entire enterprise is collapsing, and the only way to fix the core mechanism is to get his hands dirty and risk his own life in the most dangerous part of the factory.
And he does this with the full authorization and pleading of the board of directors.
Exactly. The incarnation is a million times more severe than that. But it gets at the mechanics of the willing humiliation. You cannot separate the sender from the one sent.
And what's fascinating here is the reaction of the angels in Spurgeon's narrative. It adds so much weight to that scene. He pictures the angels weeping when they lost the company of Jesus.
When the Son of Heaven bereaved them of all its light.
Yeah. They escort him to the doors of heaven, and an angel cries out to lift up the everlasting doors to let the King of Glory through. But this time, he is not returning in triumph. He is leaving to become an embryo, a baby, a suffering servant.
It is a devastating thought for the angels.
What is so captivating about this section is how Spurgeon grounds the entire incarnation in the eternal will of the great I Am. Every step of Christ's life, every suffering he endured, was marked with the approval of the Father.
Spurgeon wants the listener to connect every thought they have of Jesus with the eternal, ever-blessed God. You cannot sever the Son's mission from the Father's authorization.
It changes everything about how you read the historical accounts in the Gospels.
It really does. When you see Jesus walking the dusty roads of first-century Judea, you have to remember the starry mantles he left behind and the active, grieving Father who sent him. So that covers the celestial sender. Now we shift from the cosmic reality to the specific earthly location chosen for this event.
The coordinates.
Right. Spurgeon paints this picture of the Father as an active sender orchestrating this cosmic rescue mission. But an operation of this magnitude begs the question, if the King of Heaven is stepping onto the chessboard of human history, why drop him into a tiny dusty outpost like Bethlehem instead of the epicenter of the Roman Empire, or at least the religious capital of Jerusalem?
It seems like bad strategy.
From a human perspective, absolutely. So Spurgeon introduces 3 reasons Bethlehem was selected: history, name, and position.
Let us start with the history, because Bethlehem is deeply embedded in the narrative of Israel. Spurgeon notes that while Jerusalem might outshine it in splendor with the massive temple complex, Bethlehem clustered a number of incidents that made it highly significant.
And the first mention he brings up from the Old Testament is a sorrowful one.
Yes, it involves the patriarch Jacob and his beloved wife Rachel.
He goes back to the book of Genesis, chapter 35. Rachel is dying in childbirth. The pain and the medical reality of childbirth in the ancient Near East was brutal, and it claims her life. As her soul was departing, she named her child Ben-Oni, which translates to child of sorrow.
But Jacob, the grieving father, intervened.
Right. He changed the boy's name to Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand. And the text in Genesis notes that Rachel was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem.
Spurgeon sees a singular, almost prophetic incident here that perfectly mirrors the dual nature of Christ's life. He points out that Mary, the mother of Jesus, might have called her own son her Ben-Oni, her child of sorrow.
Especially considering the prophecy given to her by Simeon in the temple, who told her that a sword would pierce her own soul.
Exactly. As a man walking the earth, Jesus was acquainted with grief. He was the ultimate man of sorrows, ending his life on a Roman cross.
But what did God the Father call him? Benjamin, the son of his right hand.
The duality there is absolutely incredible. Ben-Oni as to his humanity and earthly suffering, Benjamin as to his godhead and eternal position of authority.
A right hand in ancient cultures always represented power, favor, and executive authority. So you have the sorrow and the sovereignty wrapped up in one location. But the history of Bethlehem does not stop with Rachel's grave.
No, Spurgeon brings up the story of Naomi and Ruth.
Right. Naomi was an Israelite woman who left her homeland because of a famine, went to the land of Moab, lost her husband and her 2 sons, and returned to Bethlehem utterly broken.
She actually told the people of the town to change her name from Pleasant to Mara, meaning bitter, because she felt the Almighty had dealt bitterly with her.
And she returns to Bethlehem with her daughter-in-law, Ruth, the Moabitess. Now, I have to interject here, because the listener might be wondering why this specific, slightly messy lineage matters at all.
It is definitely messy.
Why does Spurgeon spend his time highlighting a grieving mother dying in childbirth, a bitter widow who feels cursed by God, and a foreign gleaner from a despised nation? What does this have to do with the Incarnation?
Well, this is a critical historical layer that completely shocks the system if you know ancient Jewish law. The Moabites were born out of a scandalous, incestuous relationship involving Lot and his daughters. They were historic enemies of Israel.
And the law stated that no Moabite could enter the assembly of the Lord.
Yet here is Ruth, a Gentile from this despised nation, returning to Bethlehem. She goes to glean grain in the fields of a wealthy man named Boaz. They eventually marry, and her Gentile blood unites with the Jewish stream. From that specific union comes Obed, who fathers Jesse, who fathers David.
So it unites the bloodlines.
Exactly. It establishes that Christ did not just come for the ethnic Jews. He unites Jews and Gentiles in his very bloodstream. Furthermore, it establishes Bethlehem as the royal city, the place where kings are brought forth. The mighty hero David, the shepherd boy who smote the giant Goliath and was eventually crowned king of Israel and Judah, was born there.
Bethlehem might be small, it might be associated with grief and bitterness and foreign blood, but it is the undeniable birthplace of the royal line. It is the only place the true king of the Jews could be born to fulfill the covenant God made with David.
Which leads perfectly into the second reason for Bethlehem, its name.
The full name is Bethlehem Ephratah. If you look at the original Hebrew, the names literally translate to house of bread, house of war, and fruitfulness or abundance.
Spurgeon takes each of these literal translations and applies them to the mechanics of the gospel.
Let us analyze the house of bread metaphor first. In the first century, bread was not a side dish you had before the main course.
Like a dinner roll.
Right. It was the primary calorie source. Without it, you starve.
And Spurgeon says famished human souls cannot feed on the world's husks. He is quite blunt in his language, calling worldlings swine who are gratified by shadows and illusions.
Typical Spurgeon.
Yeah. He argues that for the desponding soul, or even for the strongest saint, there is no actual spiritual food anywhere else but in Jesus.
He says the bread of heaven is made of the bruised body of our Lord Jesus, baked in the furnace of his agonies. That is a visceral, intense visual. The wheat has to be crushed, beaten, and subjected to intense heat to become bread.
Jesus had to be crushed under the wrath of God to become the bread of life.
Spurgeon specifically contrasts Bethlehem with two other famous mountains in Scripture, Sinai and Tabor. We have tried Sinai, the mountain where Moses received the law, but on her rugged steeps grow no fruits, her thorny heights yield no corn.
Sinai gives you the 10 Commandments. The law shows you your sin, gives you a perfect standard, but it gives you zero ability or energy to meet that standard. You cannot eat the law.
Then he says, we have repaired to Tabor, the mountain of the transfiguration and glory, where Jesus shone as bright as the sun. But we cannot eat his flesh and drink his blood there. The unapproachable glory of God does not feed a starving sinner, it terrifies them.
Only Bethlehem, the house of bread, provides the broken body that provides sustenance.
You absolutely need the incarnate Christ, the bruised body, to sustain you. The physical reality of the Incarnation is the only mechanism that allows for substitutionary atonement.
The spirit cannot bleed. The law cannot bleed. Only a physical body can take the physical and spiritual punishment required by divine justice.
But the name Bethlehem also signifies the house of war. Here's where it gets really interesting, because I have to stop you there. This feels like a massive contradiction. How does the house of bread become the house of war?
It does sound like a paradox.
The entire cultural narrative around Christmas and around Jesus in general is that he is the Prince of Peace. You see it on greeting cards everywhere. How does Spurgeon possibly justify turning a symbol of nourishment and peace into a symbol of violence and warfare?
Well, Spurgeon justifies it by quoting Christ's own words from the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus himself explicitly stated that he did not come to send peace on earth, but a sword.
He came to set a man at variance against his father and the daughter against her mother.
The gospel is fundamentally offensive to human pride. It tells you that your own righteousness is completely worthless, and that you are so desperately wicked that it took the brutal slaughter of the Son of God to save you.
That message causes friction.
Yes. For the righteous who accept it, he is food. But for the wicked who reject it, he causes war. Spurgeon warns the listener directly. If you do not know Bethlehem as the house of bread, it shall be to you a house of war.
If you do not draw sweet nourishment from him, out of that same mouth will go forth a two-edged sword of destruction. It creates a stark dividing line in human history. The Incarnation forces a choice. It forces a reaction.
You cannot remain neutral when the creator of the universe steps into your neighborhood. You either bow to him or you war against him.
And then there's the third name, Ephrata, signifying fruitfulness or abundance.
Spurgeon says human hearts are naturally barren. Before Christ comes into a person's life, their internal landscape is filled with pricking thorns and mortal poisons.
They do not produce a single fruit or flower of true spiritual value until they are watered with the Savior's blood. It is his incarnation, his work, that fattens the soil of our hearts so we can actually produce anything good.
The entire ecosystem of the human soul changes upon contact with the incarnate Christ. The barren, poisonous soil becomes abundant.
So we have the history of the town, we have the prophetic meaning of its names, and finally we have the position of Bethlehem. The text in Micah says it is little among the thousands of Judah.
Spurgeon zeroes in on this concept of smallness. He says Jesus Christ always goes among little ones. He avoided Bashan's high hill.
For context, Bashan was essentially the Beverly Hills of ancient Israel. It was known for its lush pastures, its massive oak trees, and its wealthy fat cattle.
He avoided Hebron's royal mount. He avoided Jerusalem's palaces. He went to a humble, dusty village. To illustrate this, Spurgeon brings in a fascinating reference from the book of Zechariah.
Tell us about that.
He talks about a vision where a man on a red horse is standing among the myrtle trees. In the geography of that region, myrtle trees do not grow in the mountain peaks. They grow down at the bottom of the hill in the valleys.
The man on the red horse, representing the Lord, does not ride on the mountaintop of human achievement. He rides among the humble in heart down in the valley.
Big, proud hearts do not get Christ. He lies not in great hearts, but in little ones. He comes in at low doors.
Think about the physical properties of water. Water, naturally, inevitably flows to the lowest possible point. It does not pool on the sharp, jagged peaks of a mountain. It runs rapidly down the sides and gathers in the valleys and the crevices.
Christ's grace flows to the broken in heart, the low in spirit. If you despise yourself, or if you are despised by the culture around you, Spurgeon says Christ is the Christ of the little ones.
But then Spurgeon pivots from the spiritual metaphors to the actual logistical nightmare of how this birth occurred in this little village. He points out the massive geographical problem.
Oh, the travel.
Right. Mary and Joseph resided in Nazareth, which is way up in the northern region of Galilee. Bethlehem is down in the south, in Judea.
It is a grueling journey of roughly 90 miles over rough, dangerous terrain. Why would they travel to Bethlehem? Especially considering Mary's physical condition. She was in the final stages of pregnancy.
In any normal circumstance, they would have remained home in Nazareth where they had a support system and shelter. There is zero logical reason for them to take that journey.
And if they stay in Nazareth, the prophecy of Micah fails. The Messiah is not born in Bethlehem.
Enter Caesar Augustus, the most powerful man on the planet, sitting on a throne in Rome, thousands of miles away, decides he needs more money and more control.
Typical emperor behavior.
He issues an imperial decree that all the world should be taxed, and the specific mechanism of this census requires everyone to return to their ancestral city to register.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where Spurgeon unleashes his view on absolute predestination, and it is a cornerstone of Reformed theology.
Why does Caesar Augustus decide to tax Judea at that exact specific period? Why make them travel instead of just collecting their money where they currently lived, which would have been far easier administratively?
Spurgeon says it was Caesar's whim, driven by his own pride and greed, but it was simultaneously God's decree.
Wait, if God decreed the census from eternity past, does that make Caesar a mindless puppet? How does Spurgeon reconcile human free will with this level of divine micromanagement?
Spurgeon believes the Bible teaches both realities without apology. He argues that man devises his own way, acting purely on his own desires, but the king's heart is in the hand of the Lord.
Caesar quarrels with a local ruler like Herod, deposes him, decides to make Judea an official Roman province, and orders a census to figure out how much wealth he can extract. Caesar is completely responsible for his own arrogant actions.
Yet thousands of seemingly random historical chances, political maneuverings, and bureaucratic decisions collide to force a peasant carpenter and his pregnant wife down the dusty road to Bethlehem, just in time to fulfill a prophecy made 700 years prior.
Spurgeon states plainly that he sees no difficulty in the doctrine of eternal absolute predestination. He actually blames metaphysicians and philosophers for inventing difficulties where the Bible presents facts.
Man does as he pleases, yet he always flawlessly executes what God decrees. He references Judas betraying Christ for 30 pieces of silver and Pharaoh hardening his heart against Moses.
Asserting that man does as he wills, acting on his own sinful desires, but God makes him do as he wills.
The poetic language Spurgeon uses here to describe the mechanics of providence is absolutely breathtaking. He wants the listener to understand that this level of control applies to everything, not just emperors.
He says the sailing of a cloud in the sky has providence as its pilot. The root of an oak tree is gnarled and twisted in a specific direction for a specific purpose.
The summer dusk moves in its microscopic orbit, guided by the exact same hand that rolls the massive stars along in space.
The dewdrops trickle on the rose leaf as God bids them. Even the sere leaves of the forest, hurled rapidly by the tempest in a violent storm, have their allotted position where they shall fall, and they cannot go 1 inch beyond it.
It is a totalizing, comprehensive vision of sovereignty. God bounds the massive churning sea with a fragile barrier of fan, and no matter how the waves mount up in rage, they cannot exceed their allotted channel.
God guides the stars, and he wings the tiny sparrows. He speaks in thunders, and he whispers in zephyrs. So Caesar's political maneuverings are simply tools in the hand of the Almighty to ensure the birth happens in the precise geographical coordinates Micah prophesied.
The precision of it all is staggering.
We have analyzed the celestial sender and the earthly location. Now we look at the third question, the core mission of the Incarnation. What did he come for? The text says he came to be ruler in Israel.
Spurgeon points out a very singular, vital distinction here regarding the nature of kingship. Jesus Christ was born a king.
If you look at human history, men are born princes. They are born into a royal family, but they have to wait for their father to die, or they have to conquer an enemy, and then they are manufactured into kings later.
They are given crowns, they are anointed with oil, they are sworn in. But Jesus was a king the absolute moment he came on earth.
He says as soon as his eye greeted the sunshine, he was a king. From the moment his little infant hands grasped anything, they grasped a scepter. His heart beat royally, his pulse beat in imperial measure, his blood flowed in a kingly current.
He did not achieve kingship. He is the definition of kingship.
But Spurgeon anticipates the obvious objection to this claim. If he was born a king with the express mission to rule Israel, why was he despised and rejected? The Gospel of John says he came unto his own, and his own received him not.
They eventually nailed him to a piece of wood under a sign that mockingly called him King of the Jews.
Did his mission fail? Did the Romans and the Pharisees defeat the plan?
Spurgeon clarifies that Christ is not merely the ruler of Israel after the flesh in a geopolitical sense, but the ruler of Israel after the Spirit.
He rules the faithful, those who are the seed of Abraham after the Spirit, by faith. But what does that practically look like for someone listening right now? If you profess the Christian religion, if you call yourself a follower of Jesus, how do you know if he is actually your ruler or if you are just playing religious games?
Spurgeon provides very clear diagnostic criteria straight from the text. He asks the listener direct questions to test their submission. Does he command your will? Does he guide your judgment? Do you seek counsel at his hand in your daily difficulties?
If you walk through life doing exactly as you please, relying entirely on your own intuition and claiming you are in bondage to no man, you actually hate the rule of Christ.
On the other hand, if you blindly submit your conscience to a human minister or a priest without weighing against Scripture, you are acting like a slave who does not know your own dignity, because no human is your lawful ruler. Only Christ is.
He rules the internal life. He is the undisputed monarch of the affections and the mind. But Spurgeon does not limit the kingdom to the internal life forever. He casts his vision forward to a future monarchy.
He says that mission to be ruler in Israel is not quite fulfilled in its totality yet, and will not be until the latter-day glories.
He describes a universal, global monarchy. He envisions a specific time in the future when the ethnic Jews shall be restored to their land, when Hebrew songs of praise will be offered in the temple again, and the stubborn heart of the unbelieving Jew will finally be melted at the feet of the true Messiah.
He notes the irony that the one hailed King of the Jews by Eastern wise men at his birth, and written King of the Jews by a Western Roman governor at his death, shall one day reign over Jews and Gentiles across the entire habitable globe.
He uses the word coeval, a dominion coextensive with the globe, and coeval with time itself.
For the listener, coeval means his reign literally exists side by side, running parallel with the entirety of time. It's permanent. He came to be a ruler, and a ruler he most decidedly shall be.
Now we move from his birth and his future earthly reign to a concept that completely warps the human understanding of time. The fourth question from the outline: had he come before?
This is where we look at the doctrine of his pre-existence. The text in Micah says, whose goings forth have been of old from everlasting.
Spurgeon tells his congregation that the newborn child, the fragile infant slumbering in his mother's arms in the manger, is the infant of today, but he is simultaneously the ancient of eternity.
He has not been a secret, silent, inactive person up to the moment he arrived in Bethlehem. His goings forth were of old in his Godhead.
Spurgeon explains this ancient activity through the lens of election, quoting the New Testament scripture that believers were chosen in him before the foundation of the world. He went forth as our covenant head. Can you unpack what covenant head means in this context?
In Reformed theology, this refers to the covenant of redemption. It is the belief that before time, space, or matter ever existed, there was an agreement, a compact, made between the persons of the Trinity regarding the salvation of humanity.
Spurgeon describes the mechanics of this eternal covenant thoroughly. He says it was from everlasting that the Son of God grasped the stylus of ages and signed the compact with his Father.
In this agreement, the Son agreed to take on human flesh and pay blood for blood, wound for wound, suffering for suffering, agony for agony, and death for death on behalf of his specific people.
From everlasting, he gave himself up without a single murmuring word, agreeing to sweat blood in the garden, be pierced with nails, mocked by his own creation, rent asunder under the wrath of God, and suffer the excruciating agonies of the cross.
Pause and think about the sheer weight of that timeline. The cross was not a reaction to a sudden problem in the Garden of Eden. God was not caught off guard by human sin, scrambling to find a backup plan.
The cross was the flawless execution of a compact signed before the mountains were brought forth or the oceans were filled.
And Spurgeon applies this massive theological concept directly to the listener for psychological reassurance. He asks the struggling believer, if Christ has been going forth to save you from everlasting, from before time began, will he lose you now?
If he set his affection on you from eternity past, knowing with absolute omniscience exactly how badly you would act toward him, knowing every sin you would ever commit, will he slip you through his fingers today?
He frames it so beautifully. He says, he knew me before I knew myself. Yeah, he knew me before I was myself.
Long before my members were fashioned in the womb, they were written in his book. He knew your faults, he knew your betrayals, and he had a very long time to consider them.
If he intended to be tired of you, if he intended to abandon you because of your failures, he would have been tired of you long before now.
The logic there is completely impenetrable. His love in times past forbids the thought that he will leave you to sink at last.
We have established his goings forth in the eternal covenant of election. But Spurgeon goes even further into the text. He argues that Christ literally came forth to men, appearing on earth as a physical man before his grand incarnation at Bethlehem.
These are called Christophanies, or pre-incarnate appearances of Christ. Spurgeon points to 4 specific physical manifestations in the Old Testament to prove that his goings forth have been of old.
So if we look at the historical timeline, there are 4 distinct moments where he just shows up in human form. Let us walk through the narrative of these 4 instances.
Instance 1 is Abraham at the plains of Mamre in Genesis chapter 18. The context here is the ancient Near Eastern culture of extreme hospitality. Abraham is sitting in his tent door in the sweltering heat of the day, looks up, and sees 3 men standing nearby.
He immediately runs to meet them, bows down to the ground, but he addresses only one of them as my Lord.
Spurgeon identifies this conspicuous, authoritative figure as the God-man Christ, accompanied by 2 created angels. Abraham prepares a meal for them, which they physically eat.
Then, this majestic person stays behind to hold sweet fellowship with Abraham, while the other 2 angels go toward the wicked city of Sodom.
Abraham stands before the Lord and pleads for the city, engaging in this intense back-and-forth negotiation to spare any righteous people living there. Christ was in the positive, physical form of a man, walking the dusty earth and talking face-to-face with a human long before he was born in Judea.
Instance 2 is Jacob wrestling in Genesis chapter 32. Jacob is in a terrifying situation. He had stolen his brother Esau's blessing years ago, fled for his life, and now he's returning home.
He hears Esau is marching toward him with 400 men. Jacob is left alone at night by the river Jabbok. His family is sent ahead, and he's paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, a man appears and wrestles with him until daybreak.
It is a brutal physical struggle. The man finally touches the hollow of Jacob's thigh, instantly putting it out of joint.
Jacob is crippled, but he clings to the man, refusing to let him go without a blessing. The man changes Jacob's name to Israel, which means he struggles with God, saying he has power with God and men.
Jacob completely recognizes the staggering reality of what just happened. He does not think he wrestled a local nomad. He names the place Peniel, saying, I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved.
It was a physical man who could dislocate a hip with a touch, and yet it was God himself.
Instance 3 is Joshua at Jericho in Joshua chapter 5. Joshua has just taken over leadership of the nation after Moses died. He has crossed the Jordan River, entered the Promised Land, and is preparing to attack the heavily fortified city of Jericho.
The anxiety and the pressure of leadership must have been crushing. He looks up and sees a man standing opposite him with his sword drawn. Joshua, being a hardened warrior, walks right up to him and demands, Art thou for us, or for our adversaries?
The response he gets is chilling in its authority.
Nay.
But as captain of the host of the Lord am I now come.
Joshua immediately falls on his face to the earth and worships him. Spurgeon points out a crucial theological detail here. If this figure were merely a created angel, he would have instantly rebuked Joshua.
In the book of Revelation, when John tries to worship an angel, the angel stops him and says, See, thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant. Angels never accept worship.
But this captain accepts the worship completely and tells Joshua to take off his shoe, for the ground he is standing on is holy. It is undeniable, unmistakable divinity standing there with a drawn sword.
And finally, instance 4 is Nebuchadnezzar's fiery furnace in Daniel chapter 3. The Jews are in exile in Babylon. The tyrannical king Nebuchadnezzar builds a massive golden statue and commands everyone to bow down to it when the music plays.
3 young Jewish men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refuse to commit idolatry. The king is furious and orders the furnace heated 7 times hotter than normal.
It is so hot that the flames kill the soldiers who throw the bound men into the fire.
But a few moments later, the king looks into the inferno and is terrified. He says, "Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God."
This raises an important question. How would a pagan, idolatrous king from Babylon know what the Son of God looks like?
Spurgeon concludes there was something so noble, so majestic, such an awful, overpowering divine influence about this 4th man who broke the devouring teeth of the flame that even Nebuchadnezzar recognized his divine humanity instantly.
Looking at these 4 events raises a very vital question. Why did Jesus appear to these specific people in these specific moments? The Old Testament covers thousands of years of human history. Millions of people lived and died. Why Abraham, Jacob, Joshua, and those 3 youths in Babylon?
Spurgeon observes a distinct, unbreakable pattern in the text. He says Jesus does not appear to his saints every single day. It happens during times of high duty or severe affliction.
That pattern is spot on. Look at the context of each narrative. Abraham was engaged in intense intercession for Sodom, stepping into the gap to plead for lives, which is one of the highest and noblest employments of a believer.
Jacob was in deep, paralyzing affliction, facing what he thought was the imminent slaughter of his family, and he was wrestling in desperate prayer.
Joshua was embarking on a righteous, terrifying war against impossible odds. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in the absolute highest places of persecution, facing horrific execution for their firm adherence to duty and the refusal to compromise their faith.
These visitations are not random historical anomalies. They are directly tied to intense spiritual or physical crisis points. Think about a high-ranking general in a major global conflict.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The general commands the entire theater of war from a secure room far behind the lines. But he only steps out of that room and onto the actual muddy battlefield when the front lines are the most chaotic, the most intense, and the most dangerous. You do not see the general on a quiet Tuesday when nothing is happening. You see him when the fire is the hottest and the line is about to break.
That is a powerful image. Spurgeon says there are certain peculiar places we must enter to meet with the Lord in this profound way. We must be in great trouble, great labor, great intercession, or the firm performance of dangerous duty.
If we avoid the battle, if we avoid the affliction and seek only comfort, we shall not truly know him whose goings forth have been of old. We might know facts about him in our heads, we might have good theology on paper, but we will not comprehend the height, depth, length, and breadth of his love in our bones. He meets us in the crucible.
We have covered a massive amount of ground here.
We took the wrapping paper off the historical event and looked at the actual mechanics beneath. We analyzed the active equal role of God the Father in grieving and sending the Son, dismantling the idea of a reluctant father.
We looked at the extreme humility of Bethlehem's geography and history, the messy, scandalous lineage that includes Gentiles and grieving mothers, and the theological weight of the house of bread and the house of war.
We examined the staggering reality of God using an arrogant Roman emperor's ego to flawlessly fulfill a micromanaged prophecy from eternity past. We discussed the reality of Christ's kingship from his very first breath, demanding rule over our internal lives.
And the mind-bending truth of his eternal pre-existence, signing the compact of our salvation before the world began, and physically stepping into the fiery furnaces of history.
Spurgeon's final plea at the end of the sermon is directed right at the listener's immediate present reality. He says Christ has not stopped going forth. He still goes to Bethlehem. He still goes to the little ones.
If you are listening to this and you are weeping on account of your own sin, if you think yourself too small, too destitute, too afflicted, or too broken to be noticed by a holy God, Spurgeon says to go home and seek him. He will come to your poor, wretched heart, precisely because big, proud hearts do not have room for him.
He will come because his goings forth have been of old from everlasting. It is what he does, which leaves you with something to mull over on your own as we close out this session. We talked at the beginning about how we get so distracted by the wrapping paper, the outward appearance of things, that we miss the substance.
The actual gift inside.
Right. If Christ's goings forth have been from everlasting and his appearances in history always align with moments of intense crisis, affliction, or duty, how might the distinct struggles you are currently facing, the very pain, anxiety, or opposition you desperately wish you could escape, be the precise conditions required for a brand new realization of his presence in your life? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Reformed thinking. We will see you next time.